Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar, How AI Affects Corporate Tax Department, Present and Future. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them through your webinar panel and we will answer them at the end. Today we have with us Timothy McDonald, he's the head of tax at Procter & Gamble, Sharda Sharu, the EY America's Tax Intelligent Automation Process Automation Leader, Al Bradley, President of the Association for Computers and Taxation, and Tony Santiago, President and Founder of Tax Search Inc. and TaxTalent.com. So at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Tony to start the discussion regarding the big picture of AI and robotics.
So we're going to spend a few minutes discussing the bigger picture of what's going on, and then we're going to get into some more of the nitty-gritty of what's more applicable in the short term. Based upon some of the feedback some of the participants had requested as we surveyed some of them. So we're not going to be all about theory and about what's going to happen in 10, 20 years. We're going to talk about what you guys have to deal with in reality in the short term. That's going to be the most important part of this component. But we are going to start off with a little bit about the big picture of where everything is and help you hopefully get your head around it a little bit. And then we'll go into some of the nitty-gritty. So I'm going to open this question up to the panelists here. And the first one is it different this time and how? And the second question is what to keep an eye on in the future. Al, would you comment on these? Start off with us four, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, Tony. Around is it different this time? I would have to say yes, it is. Because of our ever rapidly changing field of finance, tax, and also tax legislation that's going on and has been going on, it's extremely important for tax departments to be able to react very quickly. And this is an effort that I've seen and that we're seeing at ACT that sometimes a lot of this is coming from the C-suite level, sort of like CFOs, also controllers. They would like to see the tax department react and be able to give information very efficiently and effectively. So because of this, tax departments and tax professionals are now forced to learn different ways to leverage their knowledge, not just around tax law, but also their knowledge around technology. And when they leverage this type of technology, whatever that may be, that may fit their tax department needs, not only does it build value for the tax department, but it also can allow for the tax department to have more value add in certain activities that they weren't able to do because of different mundane tasks that they were performing and day in and day out. And that's why it's different this time around. Now what's probably going to happen in the next few years or so is that we're going to see an increased amount of technology being incorporated more into the tax department. Historically, tax departments, especially our members at ACT, it's only been around compliance systems, provision systems, Excel, and those type of tax systems or technologies. Now, within the next 5 years, and now happening now, tax departments are starting to see themselves in the realm of also being very IT oriented. So things that have been in the IT organization and the IT field for some time are now making its way to the finance and tax areas. So, and we'll go into more of that obviously later on in the webinar. I'm pretty sure some of our panelists have some comments around that or have some of their insights.
Yeah, this is Tim.
Yeah, this is Tim. I'll add that I think we've always had productivity pressures.
But what's different
is it doesn't go linear.
And what we're about
to see is a big spurt.
It's similar to
30 years ago when I started my career. Corporate tax returns were typed.
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen over the last 5 years is a huge step change, and you know, the point that was made about technology and the evolution of technology, and actually, I mean, the big thing that we're seeing is a technology, whether it's AI technology or RPA technology or whatever we're seeing, is becoming a lot more business user friendly. So in our shop, what we're finding is you don't kind of need PhDs in IT to do a lot of the configurations. That the big change is people who understand process, people who know how sort of taxes work and what the rules are and the kinds of things they have to do are very suited to help in a majority of the configuration thinking in how the new technology gets used. That's one that's been that sort of has helped a lot as we talk to clients or done it ourselves.
So Al, the demand for speed from the C-suite for data for answers driving the initiatives more for the technology side. Sharda, you're seeing a move towards the IT side taking in more involvement here and it's starting to be embedded in tax at a higher degree out, and as Al said, outside of the traditional, compliance, provision, or Excel type of applications. This lends us to the next step in the process. Tim, have you had a chance yet to get yours worked out yet? You want to try? Oh, it sounds like Tim's still having some issues there. I will try to, capsulize what he commented to me, which was clearly in Tim's mind, we're changing the speed of change. What we did in 30 years will accelerate in 5 years, what Al kind of indicated. I think he's in full agreement with that. There are some things that they're doing at Procter & Gamble. Hopefully we'll get him the technology worked out here. He can add his input, but there are some things that they're doing there that I think shed light on what most organizations need to be doing, and then we'll go from there.
Can you hear me now, Tony?
Oh, yeah, much better, Tim. Why don't you go ahead and fill us in from there?
Okay, I'm now using a computer instead of the phone. What I would start to say is that early in my career, a big part of the compliance was not only manually mining the data, which still exists, that activity exists to today, but it was also manually typing 10-key, doing a corporate return in pencil, and then having a group of proofers type it and make sure it footed. And once you started to get computers, those jobs all were eliminated within 3 or 4 years. And we've largely then been having productivity in little spurts since. What's going to happen now, in my view, is that data mining is going to become much less people intensive. The technology is going to facilitate basically automating large portions of that, and it's going to free up the headcount to do more analytic work, more planning work, and the skill set that is part of the mosaic of your department is going to evolve, and the more routine tasks are going to be substantially reduced, and those that are left are going to be technologists executing those tasks.
Tim, ironically, I had an email sent to me from a gentleman who's an RBA specialist wondering why our job board didn't have specific titles for these types of people yet. So we're actually looking at us having to revamp our job board so that it will reflect the jobs of what will happen in the future. But as this guy pointed out to me, he's already doing it. He's a robotics specialist, and we're behind the curve already. So I think you're dead on target there. So let's pivot now to, if we can, to why should you care? And Tim, would you take the lead on this here a little bit more and apply that to us here, if you wouldn't mind?
Sure, and it comes from personal direct experience. We now have our second activist shareholder demanding change in the company. The first activist group was there for a couple of years. He toppled the CEO, made some other demands, and our stock moved up for a while. And now, because we're not delivering the kind of growth, although profitability is really good, the sales growth is not. We have a lot of demands on the organization. And the simple math is we'll get growth by getting productivity first. You use your productivity to fund your growth. And that pressure cuts across all departments. And even in tax, where we've largely been immune, it's very clear that pressure is coming. So my view of the world is that there's been financial performance pressure for the tax group for a long time. But now we're getting a much higher demand of that plus productivity pressure. And if there's a capacity to do that, you have to embrace it, because someone will pitch your CEO or your CFO or your board, and it'll be imposed upon you if you do not lead it.
So if the in-house tax departments don't embrace it, then the outside advisors are going to come to the plate and educate leadership and management on the productivity potential within tax. And you're already in the box then. That's what you're telling me.
Exactly.
Interesting. So before we go any further, I'd like to get Al and Brendan Short a couple minutes here to discuss just a little bit about what terminology, and just trying to dumb it down a little bit to my level, if you could, so I could understand the difference between robotics, AI, and some of the things that get bantered around, because that's, I think, maybe one of the problems that I think we see it consistently across the board. So I'm going to open this up, and Al, would you start that off, you and Brenda, if you wouldn't mind?
Sure, Tony. So I think it's really important to kind of differentiate the two, like you said. Often when you approach someone in the finance function, the tax function, and you tell them about robotics, kind of a running joke that we have within the company that I work with, and also within ACT, is that people often think, okay, well, where's the robot going to sit? And they start thinking of different things like that, weird science. I'm probably dating myself here, but and those type of things that we thought robotics was going to be, and in different ways it is. But to kind of give some examples and definition around the framework of what we're discussing here, artificial intelligence sometimes is confused with robotics, because artificial intelligence literally is a computer or a machine that is making human decisions, and it's a human intelligence. And if you think of it as similar to your Watsons, your Siris, I'm pretty sure a lot of people on the webinar are familiar with Amazon's Echo. It's actually mimicking human intelligence. It's making decisions. And then it's learning from each element that you throw to it. And then it's evolving. And it's basically developing its own way of thinking and making decisions for the human that is no longer doing that task. And an example of that is, let's just say, with Watson is a good example. There's some buzz around, the tax technology industry, around, different accounting firms starting to work with AI, trying to see what they can do with it. An example is you put, a piece of the code as far as M&E expenses or research and development, and you feed that piece of code into Watson, and then you feed it with questionnaires. And then Watson is being able to basically make an intelligent decision in calculating an M&E expense or calculating an R&D credit. Those types of functions are starting to be, played with in that industry. But robotics is something that's a little bit different. Robotics is basically automating routine human actions. I like to think of this as like a swivel chair type of approach. So you have a person that's sitting at their desk, and they are, let's say they're getting a spreadsheet, they're formatting that spreadsheet, then they're taking that spreadsheet and they're sending it off to whoever, regional controllers, CFOs, different accounting departments, or they are performing an action as far as reconciliation is concerned. So from like a transaction tax point of view, you're doing reconciliations every month, something that's routine, something that's defined, something that can be automated with a robotic process. And there's different vendors out there that kind of handle these type of things. I don't want to say kind of, but they definitely do. And this is just a few mention of some of them. Believe me, there are more than what are being mentioned, so it's really important for the users to do their due diligence in regards to what works for their department. But there's the Automation Anywhere, the Blue Prisms, the UiPaths, and then you come into the term of data analytics, which data analytics isn't a new term in the tax department per se, but it's still, I would say, an evolving term that tax departments are now in that realm of data analytics, but now they're trying to figure out how to use it more. So that's basically the process of examining the data and different data sets, and you want to come with conclusions. And this is the whole realm of big data. In the last year or two, big data was a big talked about thing, and it's still being talked about. And it's like, how do we handle this data? How can we splice it? How can we dice it? And then you have tools around that are very useful. You have your ACLs, your Alteryx. For different people who are more familiar with the ERP realm, you have your Oracles and your SAPs. And what this is doing is that it's taking in the big data. It can be transaction tax data. It can be apportionment data, whatever it is for your tax function, and it's putting it in a certain order that you would like for it to see. And then you can layer that with data visualization. And what the data visualization does is that it's taking that big data and then it's putting it and packaging it up into a nice, I would like to say, a readable format. So heat mapping per se, if you want to see where your highest sales are, where you want to focus in on, you want to look at apportionment, you want to look at NOLs, you want to look at those type of things. After getting that big data into an analytical solution, you can then do certain things as far as heat mapping are concerned. And that really gives the users the ability to see where their exposure is, to see where they should be focusing more of their efforts on. So it's kind of layered in, and with that, you have different data visualization tools. There's Tableau, ClickSense, Microsoft Power BI, those types of realms. I don't know, Sharda, if you have anything to add to that.
No, that's exactly right. What's also very interesting that we're finding is, exactly what you said is robotic process automation is about what people are doing, mimicking what human beings do, right? Adding, and the AI part is mimicking how human beings think, right? So it's about thinking, it's about acting. But what's also very interesting is what we're finding is tools are converging, where some of these really have started having features of sort of all in one with modules that would do RPA, modules that would do machine learning, AI type of stuff, modules that would do analytics, and modules that have visualizations that give you the insights. But I mean, a simple piece, for example, one of the things we've been very active in is RPA with building in AI pieces. And what we're trying to do is, when you configure a bot, you're basically giving it all the steps that a human being does, go into the system, log in to one source, put your password in, then do this, go into that, go into the general ledger, pull this information, put it in a spreadsheet, all that good stuff. Now, what we are also doing is tagging certain processes within those steps to do better data analytics with. So as we're configuring robots, one of the things we're also actively doing is, let's say the robot does 25 steps. What we're also doing is which ones of those 25 steps have data that we want to capture for other purposes, right? So as you're doing 25 steps and maybe, it's, let's say, preparing state returns and completing the state returns, well, you might need the piece of data which has to do with, overpayment applied to the next year, and that feeds into your estimated payment calculation and the estimates for the following quarter or the following year. Or you might have state apportionment factor data that as a robot's completing the return or filling information or looking at the final return, pulling information for data analytics, where the robot pulls it and looks at the apportionment factor, let's say for 2016, and says, hey, you know what? I need to figure out what my effective rate average is going to be for state X for 2017, and using that data to do analytics and sort of predict, essentially do a calculation of your effective rate for the following year. So what we're finding is some of these things, the dots are getting connected a lot more rapidly across, which sort of helps and makes it somewhat easier than it was before. You're not working sometimes with 4 different tools also. But again, the very early days, there are not too many tools who do it all. Okay. Yeah.
So, Sharda, question for you and the group there. You guys did a very good job when we first started talking about this, of making it clear to somebody like me and some of my other tax people I work with that we get confused with this idea that it's a robot. It's a physical thing sitting next to you that's a robot. And really what we're talking about by bots is software. And it's simply software that's doing what a human replicates and does to make it easier, faster, more accurate, and speed it up like Al talked about. We also talked about AI, and you guys did a really good job of talking about AI and saying that ultimately could be a tremendous game changer if it can work, if it can. So there's plenty of things that have to be fixed on it, but thinking like a human changes everything. It's a completely different game plan. Our members were very nervous about, getting too far ahead of ourselves. I know in the comments we got back, it's like, what do I focus on understanding? What do I need to get up to speed on in the next year or 2 or 3? And really honing in on that. Am I fair to say that keep an eye on AI? It's something you've got to be aware of, but your bulk of your time and effort right now should be really getting your head around robotics and the software bots that are being built, the data analytics and the visualization. Am I off base? I'd love to have the panelists' comments, and then we're going to open this up to some of the questions that hopefully some of the participants have asked, and we're going to get some of these answered here in the next session as well. Panelists, am I circling that around okay, or did I miss something?
I think that you're right. And when it comes to robotics, that's definitely something that I think the tax department should get their heads wrapped around sooner than later. And I'm pretty sure Tim can speak to that more from his experience or his knowledge around, routine tasks, more value add, having associates focus on other tasks that will lead to more analysis, that will lead to more cash tax savings in those types of areas.
Yeah, I would add that RPA will only work if your processes are first well documented. So it really is on the organization to map out each logical step first, then partner, in our case, with our shared financial service group, who runs the rest of the accounting system. And we are in the process of embedding tax people into those centers whose job it will be to help supervise the install and the maintenance of the tax components of the bots.
I would agree.
Yeah, yeah, and because if you think about, if you look at tax today, our sense is about 50% of the time is spent on data gathering, right? Gathering data to do real tax work, right? You're gathering data from systems, you're pulling it from, especially if you have a number of systems, right? pulling it from the prior year, pulling it from the returns, pulling it from the systems, and what RPA, to the point that was made, is the focus, but you kind of have to have that process laid out. Although what we're also finding is some of these RPA tools have recorders, right? So what you literally do is put the bot on a laptop, and you record what I'm doing. I hit the start button, I hit the stop button, and it records all the keystrokes I do, and it won't be able to potentially automate everything, but it's recording what I do, and essentially figuring out and throwing out the actual configuration too. So it actually gives you the code for how that needs to be programmed too. So clearly, I mean, the process, well documented, makes it much easier, and it just sort of helps in that 50% zone where you're spending a lot of time gathering data to put put tax returns together, or put tax planning models together, or whatever.
Sure. Can you also comment on the pros and cons of the RPAs and what they actually can do in practical terms now that people should be thinking about implementing it to their tax functions here?
Go ahead. Sorry.
So I know from an ACT perspective, Tony, what we've seen as far as ACT is concerned around robotics and what our members are doing with that is in the areas of apportionment rate loads. So you have it, I'm pretty sure a lot of the participants on the call can relate to, you may have different tax systems when it comes to your compliance system and your provision system. And this is very common, and it's definitely a user preference. But when it comes to exporting out those apportionment rates out of your compliance system, getting them into your provision system, especially if you're dealing with a company that is very large and has a lot of subsidiaries, has a lot of exposure, is in all 50 states, and they just have a lot of rates that they have to load. So what they're doing is they're using RPA with basically taking those rates out of their compliance system and then bringing them to the provision system, and they're streamlining that in a way that they can now focus on other tasks. So once that bot does its routine job, they can then go into the provision system and do the tasks that they need to do. And when that bot is doing that, it's freed them up to do more value add. There's also that we've seen areas around transaction tax. I always like to think that the transaction tax piece of a tax department could be low-hanging fruit, because transaction tax is very repetitive. I'm not saying that other areas are not competitive, but if you really think about it, especially in the sales tax realm, you have your monthly reconciliations, you have your data formatting. So some of our members have created bots, well, not created bots, they've deployed bots that have done monthly reconciliations for them, and it has saved a tremendous amount of FTEs in their monthly reconciliation process. Also just data formatting and formatting the spreadsheets. And from a property tax standpoint, if you have a company, and we have some members that are looking into doing this, you have a company in which has a pretty good amount of property tax exposure, and they have property tax that they're paying on behalf of their customers, and within their various contracts, the customers are responsible for refunding back that property tax to the company. So they're developing a process, or looking to develop a process with RPA, in which it takes that information out of whatever property tax system that they're using and formatting it and getting it through their billing system, and then automatically billing their customers. And this is really taking the human element out of it, because we all know that the human element can be there could be some flaws that somebody could transpose the wrong number. And if you have a company that has millions of dollars of property tax that's responsible for, you could increase the monies that are basically recouped. So that's just what we're seeing. Sharda, I'm pretty sure from your position you're seeing a lot more, or even things that are more detailed.
No, those are great examples. I mean, we've automated about 200 plus processes, and we're looking at sub-processes, right? So, I mean, even a simple thing like, printing of the returns. We file 38,000 sales and use tax returns every month for our clients, right? And, when you have to print these returns, we use a certain, system like Vertex, like many people I'm sure use. But when you have to print these returns, it just comes out in bulk printing. Well, what the robot also helps you do is, create the dividers between, California and your next state, et cetera, and separates that out, separates that piece out, PDFs that, sends it to the right person, so that even simpler tasks like that, like printing the returns, printing them to PDF, and then saving them in the right place or emailing them to some place. I mean, it's the same thing with, you talk about, the tools, the compliance tools, right? One source income tax. Companies with many legal entities, one of the big, even though things are automated in one source income tax, the very fact that, many companies we find are spending a lot of manual time. If you have 50 to 100 or 300 legal entities, you're basically uploading each and every legal entity one by one into your one source income tax. Well, the bot can go in and, pull the latest TB at a certain time. In fact, can check if your TB trial balance has changed because they're last minute adjustments, and pull it from your GL and upload it directly. And if you do it 100 times, if you take 5-10 minutes to do it, by the time you open systems, pull it up and upload it. So that sort of repetitive, uploading into the GL, uploading your trial balances into the one source income tax piece, and then clicking through the various screens is the other piece. I mean, Vertex, uploading spreadsheets into Vertex, formatting them first, and then uploading them into Vertex for sales and use tax or other purposes is another thing we've seen. The one thing that I'd point out is, one of the things we tried that didn't work quite well was, e-filing works a lot in a lot of different areas, but what we did is when we were trying to file, there are a whole bunch of states when you e-file sales and use tax returns, because the state websites are just, I'd say, antiquated in many ways, and they freeze up and things like that happen. What we found is e-filing in certain states, for state where we were having bots try and do that, file and go and take the return and e-file in states, that became a little cumbersome because the state websites would freeze. You'd have to, go, it would get locked out. Then you'd have, they're asking, what's your, grandmother's first name or whatever else, and those password right? The bots weren't quite able to do that, so we had our bots stop doing the e-filing in a bunch of different states, although the e-filing for other purposes is much easier, and bots doing e-filing, or even, when you get e-filing diagnostics, looking at them and sorting them out and sending and trying to figure out, what those are, and routing to them to the right person is sort of another one we've used it for. I mean, we've automated over 200 different, I'd say, sub-processes that are working quite well.
Tim, what have you found at P&G when it comes to this issue and revolving around process documentation, writing it down, and quality improvement as you develop these and go forward with them?
We're kind of at the beginning part of that. A lot of the people that are very competent carry the process in their head, and so much of the next year is going to be attempting to get much better control on the actual step-by-step documentation. I'm kind of intrigued by the possibility of loading a bot and recording. That would probably lighten our burden quite a bit, but we're very much at the beginning. We've launched a group. It's jointly run with the Shared Service Center and our corporate accounting function.
So basically trying to get out of what's in people's heads and documenting it down. It's very basic of basic things. If we're going to have a robot repeat it, let's make sure we know what it's supposed to be doing and have it clearly defined.
Correct. And the other thing, which is important to do, and it cuts against just recording, is you should be second guessing all these steps. Are all the steps that we've done for 20 years still relevant? And I think you'll find many of them aren't. And so, for example, materiality, it varies by individual. When you actually penetrate, you find some people understand the big picture. I've got a $3 billion global tax provision. I don't need the tax return down to $100. Other people have such a risk adverse, they don't want to be wrong, that they'll tie it to the dollar. We have to change that.
Yeah, interesting. Eli Goldratt many years ago, excuse me, Charlotte. Eli Goldratt came up many years ago, Goldratt Institute, and talked about the failures of SAP implementations, the big ARPs, that how come they didn't produce the productivity results that they were promised to do right away. And he pointed out that a lot of the rules that were built around the limitations prior to you getting these software packages and put in were staying in place. The old rules were undermining the productivity of the new software capabilities. They were put in place to protect you from the limitations of what was there before. But as we develop these new capabilities, I think Tim is absolutely correct. Challenging what's needed, what's necessary anymore is essential. And I think it's a huge step in the right direction. Charlotte, you were going to comment on something? I apologize.
No, I was going to agree. No, absolutely agree with Tim. In fact, what we're finding is that the beauty about configuring a bot, when you get the code, is sort of look at, what are people really doing? You start seeing what people are really doing. And what you realize is you have 4 people literally reviewing each other's work. The staff person did it, and then the senior reviews it, and then someone else reviews it. And you start wondering, why do we need 4 levels of review, comparing the same 1099 4 different times to the organizer or whatever is being done, right? And so what we are finding over the last 2 years that we've automated stuff is 30% of the time is sort of pure automation. You're getting, process, time efficiencies. But 20% of the time is exactly what Tim's talking about. We are finding redundant processes that we don't need to get done. In fact, we've discovered so many things that, when you're in the trenches, because when you configure a bot, you have to know the X amount of detail, right, or what human beings actually do. And we are basically finding that 20% of the time savings is just because there's a huge amount of redundancy, whether it's in reviews or that materiality issue that Tim pointed out, that is really needs to be cut out, because honestly, it becomes busy work after a certain point in time. And the other thing about the standardization, actually, this is something that I never expected would happen. What was very interesting, and Tim, again, made this point very clearly, is when you look at 5 different people and how they do the same thing, they do it differently, right? So so let's say we go, what we actually did is we went to 5 different groups and say, okay, you do this process, how do you do it? And we basically started looking at how 5 different people did it. And what happened as a result of that, what we discovered is the great stuff that people do, and we came up with sort of one way to do stuff which was the best of breed from all the 5 different groups, right? And that's what the robot did. And what it did is it sort of forced standardization in a backdoor way, because what we took is the best of breed of 5 different groups and said, hey, you know what? This is the best of breed steps. This is what we'll do. And that's what we had, configured into the robot. And essentially, once a robot does those steps, it's sort of out of the human being's hands. And because you can give human beings templates, you can give them a process map, you can, there's a lot of process maps that gather dust over the years that actually don't get used, but because people are kind of tweaking them in their own way, and some of it's very, makes sense. So that's what we're finding that this has become a backdoor way for us to standardize stuff, because we're discovering what different groups do, and we're just roboticizing it one way that sort of takes the best of everything. So that's sort of an interesting thing that I never thought would happen, is sort of a faster way to standardize it because you're configuring it just one way.
The other thing you'll see is change management. Some people are very comfortable doing the task the way they did it. They'll be less resilient to this whole process, and some of them may not make the cut as a result. Those that are open to change, this should not be disruptive to their way of viewing their career. But if you don't want to grow, and if you don't want to deal with change, this process will run people over.
Well, that's a natural lead into our next section on defining the roles within this AI world that we're going into. But I think due to timing, since we've only got 15 minutes left, I'm going to deviate a little bit, and we'll do defining the roles at the end after we answer some of the questions that might have come in. Shannon, can you take the lead here and see if there's any questions that participants would like us to get addressed while we can?
Yep, yeah, we got plenty of questions in. So the first one we have is, let's see. So it is dangerous to take the position that it's close enough for government work and you do not have to get it right to the last dollar unless there is a certainty that the IRS's audit guidelines and automated flagging systems do not pick out returns that are off by a little to the same degree as returns that are off by a lot. So do you see much of a role for AI in planning?
Well, those are two different questions. As to the former, I'm a large case 14. We have people there all the time, but they have less resources every year. In materiality, whether those agents want to deal it or not, the LBI leadership is going to impose it on them, and we can help manage to that direction. And on our return, materiality is $100,000 is precise enough on most of our numbers. And that doesn't mean it's universally true. So in the indirect tax role in Brazil, they have an automated system that reaches into your system to pre-approve a transaction. They have over 90 different indirect taxes, and they can actually suspend your business operations if you don't get an approval for a transaction. Their matching is very critical, and it has to be very precise. So it depends on the environment.
Do we see, Tim, the government accelerating their ability to use bots and technology to, and I'll open this to Tim and to Sharda and to Albert as a follow-up to this question. Do we see the government accelerating at a rate that we have to be more concerned that the threshold points, the accuracy, like you use the example of Brazil versus a large case U.S. currently, is that going to change dramatically in the next couple of 2, 3, 4 years that we need to be conscious of it?
Yes, there's definitely governments that are leading. Brazil's one of them. I was in Russia 2 weeks ago. Russia's heading into that path pretty quickly. They actually have a very modern tax administration in Russia, and others will follow. The IRS will probably lag.
Interesting. They're lagging.
Yeah, I would say, Tony, that as far as the taxing authorities are concerned, some of them are already there. To Tim's point, with Russia being a very modern taxing authority and taxing jurisdiction, but also if you even take it down to the state level, I know that some of our member companies, when it comes to a state tax audit, or let's just say a state transaction tax audit, you have some of these state auditors now that are coming in, and they're coming in already trained on certain technologies to audit your data. They're using these tools like ACL. And and I know this from personal experience that a state auditor is coming in from a transaction tax point of view, and they're using ACL to audit your data. So it's already here. And because of that, we were forced to kind of use certain technologies as data analytics to kind of reverse audit our data before we provide the data to the auditor, who's probably going to use the same type of technology. And our members at ACT, our members at ACT are starting to get on the board with that. They're starting to do the same thing now. They're like, oh, well, if the auditors are going to be doing this, then maybe we should invest in things that we can do reverse audits prior to handing it off to the authorities. So it's not when it's going to come, it's here, and you have to get on board before you get behind the times.
For timing's sake right now, I'm going to jump to the next question, Shannon. Just kind of get as many of these as we can in, if that's possible.
Yep. So the next question is, how flexible is an RPA once the initial implementation is completed? For example, acquisition of new legal entities subsequent to the implementation of the RPA.
Sharda, can you address that?
Sure. Actually, that's a great question. One of the things when we configure the bots, we try to make them very flexible, because you're absolutely right. Hard coding a lot of information into the bots will make the tweaking or the configuration, the reconfiguration more time consuming. So a lot of what we do is combine RPA with old tried and true techniques. So let's say you have a bot doing a certain activity. Well, and it's doing it for 10 legal entities. And there's 3 more legal entities that come into the picture. The way we configure those things is we basically create a rule book for the bot that's not in the actual configuration, but it's actually in an Excel sheet where if 3 more legal entities come in, you add those 3 legal entities to the Excel worksheet that the tax department person can do, in that format. And then the bot just continues doing the same thing that you wanted it to do. So instead of 10 legal entities, it's 3 more legal entities to do it for, right? So that sort of rule book concept of using the good old Excel and having the bot work with the Excel to do it is something that we've used quite a bit in our sort of solution design of how you do the bots. I mean, the same thing, and in tax departments, a lot of times things aren't predictable, right? So sometimes you need the provision done, but the data comes in on the 5th of the month, sometimes it's on the 7th of the month, and sometimes it might be at midnight on the 8th, right? So what we do is create rule books and almost like a due date calendar for a bot in Excel. And if we know on the 7th that the stuff's going to move to the 8th in the morning, we just change the due date calendar in Excel for the bot to perform that on 8th in the morning as opposed to 7th in the afternoon kind of thing, right? So that the bot knows when to do it, and as things get added, the tax department's doing that. So the design part of the bot design, and into what Tim was saying earlier, is the process piece of it, and making sure the process is flexible and sort of and lasts is very important.
Okay, great. Shannon, any other questions? Let's go through as many as we can go through here.
Yep, the next one is, does anyone have experience consuming return data if compliance is outsourced and the only deliverable is a PDF of the return?
Sorry,
I'll
what was
open
the
that
question?
to the panel.
Can you repeat the question if you don't mind?
Yep. Does anyone have experience consuming return data if compliance is outsourced and the only deliverable is a PDF of the return?
Yeah. I mean, the question is it a readable PDF or a non-readable PDF, right? And what we for non-readable PDFs, it's much trickier. We then have to go back to the source data that's in some other form other than PDF. But there are readable PDFs that bots work with all the time. So it sort of depends on the kind of PDF. And what I would suggest is, if you're getting a return back in PDF, ask for readable PDFs that bots can work with.
Okay. Next question.
Hey, Tony.
All right, Tim.
Just real quick. I just want to add to that, to Sharda's piece really quickly. If it is a non-readable PDF, I would also look into some type of OCR technology, which is like the optical character recognition, because that may also be able to be leveraged along with the robotics. But I'll just leave it at that. But that's just an important point that whoever asked that question should know.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, very good point. In fact, some RPA tools already have OCR built into it, so they do that as well. Yeah, but again, it's yeah.
Next question, Shannon.
Yep. Oftentimes, the level of materiality is often dictated by the external auditors as well as government auditors. With an RPA, how does it help when under audit?
Well,
Who wants to grab that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's Charlie.
Well, the way I think of it is that's the relationship you manage with people today. The RPA is just executing the design you choose. And that's no different than doing it with people. The difference is it can mine the data 5x, 10x faster, and it will exactly follow the same process each time, which often humans don't do.
So even though the materiality could be variable, how do you compensate for that with robotics? I think that's kind of the variability of the materiality based upon the specific auditor, individual, or state or jurisdiction.
Yeah, I mean, bots can basically, bots, because they, to Tim's point, because they work so fast, you literally can have them look at everything that human beings really wouldn't even have time to look at and pull everything out. I mean, we've had situations where, I mean, a simple thing like even exemption certificates for sales and use tax, people are setting materiality limits because people don't have the time to go to every single one and do it. With bots, we're basically having everything done. Or if you need invoices pulled for an auditor, if they want every single thing done, it's going to be done a lot faster by bots. We've shrunk stuff that takes 4 to 6 weeks to literally a few days because the bots can pull the information for the auditor so much faster than human beings could ever pull. So in many ways, it's sort of a data overload. Bots can certainly do that.
That's interesting. All right, Shannon, next question.
Next question is, this one's directed for Tim. Have you found that an IT department in another area of your company has already taken on RPA functions that you have been able to capitalize and piggyback for tax purposes?
Regrettably, no. we about 15 years ago outsourced most of our IT, and with it, eventually, a lot of our capability, and we're rebuilding that. And so as a result, our shared service center is almost at the same starting point that we are.
Next question, Shannon.
What type of security will be provided for implementing bots?
Yeah. I mean, bots actually have 6 levels more of security than most human beings can do. They have security walls where passwords. They have more encryption built into the actual tools. There's also in the data transfer piece, stuff gets encrypted because it's sort of built into the tools. So, we actually talk to our clients a lot about this. There's sort of 6 levels more of security in bots that are actually built into tools than human beings. And in some ways, bots only do what you ask them to do. So they're not like human beings. I might get a phishing email and open it up and subject my system to being hacked or whatever, right? Bots will not do that because they weren't configured to do that. They just do what you ask them to do. And so if they get an email that they're not configured to open, they're not going to open it. So between the security walls and bots, basically, each bot gets its own machine, whether it's virtual or a laptop. It basically has a credentials vault where its password gets stored. Its password essentially gets changed just like whatever protocols you might have, 45, 60 days. So that password change happens as well, so that no one can act like a bot and do stuff on the bot machine. So in many ways, I mean, we've had situations where people, once they've implemented stuff, find that it's a lot more, and HR departments love it because they can go into all kinds of HR records and pull information where you don't have human beings having to do a lot of that stuff as well. So that's sort of, there's a fair amount that the tools luckily have put in to the bot because they realize, you want to make sure they're as foolproof as you can make them.
Shannon, another question?
Yep, the next one. This one's for Sharda. Can you give some of the economics around doing RPA, such as typical investment, things like that?
So it depends. Yeah. So the first thing you do is you have to get a bot license, right? And think about as an RPA license as you've hired a person, right? But this RPA license allows you to essentially run the bot 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, right? So in some ways, the way you think about it is, okay, I got a person that works for me, a virtual person, 365 days, 24 hours a day, but obviously there's going to be some downtime. So in some ways, you look at it, say, okay, that's 365 times 24 is about 8,700 hours worth of work. However, what we're finding also is our bots work 5 to 10 times faster than human beings. So if something gets done by a person for 10 minutes, the bot sometimes can do it for a minute or 2 minutes. Our first proof of concept basically was a 69-minute process that a human being did was done in 6 minutes by the bot. So it's in a rough order of magnitude, one bot can do sometimes as much as 40,000 hours worth of work. And a bot license is on an average under 10 grand a year. So basically you're thinking about under 10 grand a year, here's just the license cost, right? 10 grand a year, you can get as much as 40,000 hours worth of work from that bot. Then the bot can do sales and use tax returns for the first hour, do bank reconciliations from 10 to 11, and you have them do property tax returns. So it's not like a human being that I'm just sitting here doing sales and use tax returns all day long, right? So you can load up the 40,000 hours with a lot of different things. So that's one piece of the economics, which is the license fee. Then the question is training the bot, right? That's the upfront cost of essentially, and it depends on how many steps there are in a process, right? So if there's like 500 steps in a process, that's going to take, it's basically time and materials in training a person, but in training the bot. But what's very interesting is once you train the bot once, right, you obviously might have to tweak it over time. The process changes, but it's not like training human beings. You can train 10 human beings to do the same thing, and they'll probably do it a little different each time, and 10 different people might do it differently. So the training costs up front of the bot depends on the process. So, sometimes it just takes a week to program a bot, depending upon how many steps you have, and sometimes it takes 3 weeks or 5 weeks to do it, depending upon how many steps you have. The key is how many variations do you have? Do you have one step that's done 15 different ways? In January it gets done this way, in February it gets done another way, in March it gets done. That's where the costs and time build up. So basically you're looking at the bot license cost, and you're looking at upfront configuration, and on ongoing maintenance, the tweaking part isn't a huge investment. It's of hours, so to say. The big piece that comes in. Go ahead. Sorry, I know we're over with it. That gives you an overview. There's a few other nuances.
So, Sharda, just from a numerical standpoint, dollars and cents, you talked about the licensing fee being 10, 15,000, whatever that be. Training will variable between 1 week to 3 weeks to 4 weeks to some, based upon the complexity. What kind of dollar range would that tend to cost the client to do the training element, the second phase?
Yeah. So the initial sort of configuration can be anywhere from, let's say, $15,000 to $20,000 to configure the bot and get it ready, basically for perpetuity. To it can be 50 to 100 grand, depending. If you have 500 steps to configure, it would be a lot longer, right? So yep. Anywhere from the low end, 10, 15 grand to 100 to 200, depending on how much more you have to give it to configure and how many variations you have.
Okay. And then the maintenance is going to be on an ongoing basis as needed, but it tends to be minuscule, you're saying.
Yeah, it's not that much. I think the key, though, is, but I'll tell you the big thing that you gain with bots that we found is you regain white space. A lot of time what we find is, when you have human beings, there's a lot of stopping and starting and distractions, right? And we find that the white space can be as high as 30% of a person's time, right? I'm doing stuff for 2 hours, all of a sudden, there's lots of fatigue. I want to take a cup, go out, jump out for a cup of coffee, lunch, whatever else, or just take a break. I get distracted because someone just, whatever, FaceTime me or whatever happened, right? So that stuff, the bot doesn't go out, so you regain also that sort of efficiency because you don't have the human white space of just being, just being more distracted than bots would be.
I'm going to try to cash some chips in here and do a follow-up webinar with the same panelists at later time, because I think as we start to talk about this, we didn't answer nearly all the questions we have. We also have the defining of roles, and that means whether we do it in-house, whether we outsource it to a third party like Charter's organization. I think there's much more meat and potatoes here to be dealt with in the practical reality of what we all are going to have to deal with over the next 2 to 3 years that we can't put off. As everybody said, we're going to face it one way or the other. You're either going to proactively get ahead of the curve or somebody's going to knock on your door and you're going to find out you're behind the curve big time and you're going to be panicking to catch up. So if the panels would agree that potentially if we can work their schedules, we could do a follow-up to this and focus on defining roles and maybe a couple of other quick topics, and also address the rest of the questions. I think that would be best. I still want to keep it under an hour for now. Tim's got limitations on his schedule right now. He's in the Senate tax reform in D.C. working on things, and I know Al and Charter, we tap them about as much as we can for today. Guys, does that sound reasonable to you guys as a proposal?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, then Shannon, if you want to wrap this up, then you can do that, and then we will send out invites to everybody who signed up for this one for the second round as well, and we will address everybody's additional questions as much as we possibly can. We'll pull them all together. If you guys have additional participant questions, we'll send you a mechanism to where you can send those to us as well, so we can try to get everybody addressed and try to group the questions together over time. That we will take a look at those and try to capsulize them into, if there's 2 or 3 similar ones, we'll make sure we consolidate them so everybody gets everything addressed. All right, then I'm going to jump off. Shannon, you can wrap everything up if that's okay?
Yep, sounds good. Thanks, Tony.
All right, thanks for everybody.
Yep.
Take care.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, for joining us. I got a lot of questions about whether we'll be sending the deck to everyone. Everyone will receive both the recording of the presentation as well as the slide deck. And like Tony said, we're going to have an online forum to continue the discussion regarding this topic of AI and robotics. So I will send everyone instructions on how to access this forum and the links that we can ask additional questions for the panel. And like I said, once we have more details on our follow-up webinar, I will send that to you as well. But thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you again to participants. We really appreciate it. Just look for an email from me, and that will be coming within the next day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.